There's a place the maps don't warn you about, where no gravestone exists. No funeral procession ever leaves its gate. Because on this island, death is not allowed. Literally, a royal decree still active. A centuries-old law that says, no one may die here. And for hundreds of years, no one publicly has. Welcome to Isola di Poveglia, Italy's most cursed and censored land. But what you've heard in whispers is only the surface. Because beneath this law lies something ancient. Something hidden beneath Vatican records and forgotten plague pits. In the 1700s, when the bubonic plague returned to Venice, the sick were rounded up like cattle and shipped to this island. They were told it was for quarantine, but no one ever came back. The priests called it a spiritual quarantine zone, but behind closed doors, it became a human experiment farm. Thousands of souls, diseased, disoriented, discarded, left to rot. And then, when their bodies didn't decay properly, they began burning them in mass trenches. The ash, mixed with soil, that soil still exists. It's said over 50% of the island's ground is human remains. But the horror didn't end there. Because in 1922, the government tried to cover it with a new label. Mental asylum. What better place to hide those who remember too much? And that's when survivors began telling the unexplainable. Shadow forms, with no heat signatures. Voices whispering in Latin, invisible hands pulling them back when they tried to escape. This wasn't a haunting. It was a containment zone, because something was never meant to leave that island. And now, you're starting to understand why death was banned. You see, banning death wasn't about saving lives. It was about trapping souls. After the fires died out and the plague pits cooled, something stayed. Witnesses began to report strange light anomalies, glowing arcs at night centered around the mass graves. People described dreams that weren't theirs, visions of rituals, of a doctors with no eyes, and your priests who never blinked. The asylum patients weren't mad. They were remembering. A handful of records survived, smuggled by a nurse who fled in 1931. In her notes, she wrote, "They don't die. Their minds crack, but their presence lingers. They keep coming back. Time doesn't work here." She also spoke of a room sealed in concrete under the West Wing, where the air reportedly hums. And compasses spin violently. Some say it was built directly above a gate, not metaphorical, but from literal fracture. An opening the priests found during the final plague cycle. One they tried to bargain with, because the church knew this island was olden before Rome was ever built. It had a name once, long erased. Whispers claim it was an ancient Etruscan ritual zone, where death wasn't seen as passage, but as currency. An offering. And when they filled it with plague victims, they didn't close the curse. They fed it. So the island began to collect. Not just bodies, but consciousness. A psychic prison built from bone and ash. And the world let it fade. Because if you go deep enough into hidden Vatican archives, you'll find a memo marked non mortis. Not of death, but of something far worse. Halfway down. Now you know too much. To anchor your awareness, comment below. I see the gate. Say it again. I see the gate. This marks your descent. And trust me, the next layer is where reality starts to bend. There's something they don't tell you about islands like Poveglia. They're not chosen for convenience. They're chosen because they sit on points of power. Ley lines, energetic grids mapped long before modern science even had language for them. Ancient civilizations knew. They built altars where the veil was thinnest, where the transition between life and death could be delayed, bent, manipulated. The Etruscans, the earliest rulers of that land, were obsessed with liminality, the spaces between breath and silence, waking and sleep, death and rebirth. They didn't bury their dead to mourn them. They buried them to bind them. And on that island, they found something they weren't supposed to. A node, a fracture, a loop. Fast forward to the 20th century, when the asylum's head doctor, name erased from all modern archives, began conducting unauthorized rituals under the guise of lobotomies. Patients weren't cured. They were made hollow, conduit. And when he threw himself from the bell tower, some say it wasn't suicide. They say he saw what he'd created. Locals claim that no one has heard the bell in decades, but some nights, across the Venetian lagoon, fishermen swear they hear it toll. But here's what breaks the illusion. Satellite imaging from 2007 caught an anomaly. Infrared. A sudden surge of heat beneath the ruins, in the shape of a spiral. Heat! Where there is no life. Where there should be nothing. You think this is just a ghost story? No. This is architecture. Spiritual engineering. A system built to collect what religion could not explain. And science was told to forget. You are not standing on neutral ground. You are standing on a machine made of suffering. And in the final descent, we confront who's still feeding it. Here's the truth they buried beneath every stone, every burnt record, every Vatican seal. Poveglia was never just a cursed island. It was a test site, a prototype for something global, a blueprint for how to trap consciousness within the illusion of freedom. You've been taught to fear death, but on that island, death isn't an ending. It's a denial, a refusal to let the soul pass through the veil unless it complies, unless it forgets. Karen, one of the last nurses stationed there before the island was sealed, kept a diary hidden in a family vault. Inside it, she wrote, "The patients speak of tunnels not made of dirt, but of memory. Rooms with mirrors that don't reflect your body, only your shame." She claimed priests in black robes still walked those halls long after the asylum was shut down, performing rituals at night not to ward off spirits, but to harvest what still lingers. Because death may be outlawed, but that doesn't stop what feeds off the dying. There are men, alive today, who have walked that island and returned with more influence none than before. More power, but never more peace. Because once you step into that spiral, a part of you stays there, bound, watched, catalogued. You think the experiment ended? No. They just made the world the island. The rules have changed. But the mechanism, the grid, the gate, it's everywhere now. Hospitals, mental wards, screens, even your dreams. You were never meant to die free. You were meant to be recycled. But now you know, and that changes everything. So I'll ask you one last time. Will you forget this? Or will you remember? Comment below to leave a mark the system can't erase. I see the gate. I see the gate. Now walk carefully, because some doors